Hello, and welcome to Wicked Wednesdays, your weekly podcast on sex and sexuality with an emphasis on BDSM, kink, and poly relationships. I'm your host, Wicked Fellow, and this week we're going to talk about Dom 101, where to start. Before we get started, I want to send a very special thank you to our newest Patreon, Sin P. Thank you very much for your support. And I want to send a very special birthday shout out to little Liz. I am very glad that I've gotten to know you better over the last year as a patron, and I enjoy our monthly calls very much. You're one of my favorite patrons to talk to, and I'm very happy to wish you a happy birthday. As you might be able to tell, I'm a bit under the weather, so my voice is not all that it could be. I appreciate you bearing with me as I try to get through this. And I think we're going to be a little late this week as I've been running behind, but I will try to get it out on time. One more thing before we get started, and I've spoken with the patrons about this quite a bit over on my website where you too can donate, shameless plug, wickedfellow.com, by the way. And that's, I'm a very political person, and I've never hesitated to wear my colors on my sleeve, as it were. And I haven't said anything about our ongoing political situation in the U.S. It's not because I don't have thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts. The reason I haven't talked about it here is I have not been able to listen to a lot of my favorite podcasts for the last couple of months because, we here in the States are so overwhelmed with what's going on, and everybody's talking about it all the time, including podcasts that really don't have any business talking about it, that it's hard to escape. And I have had a hard time myself because it can be pretty grueling. And when I listen to a podcast, a lot of the time I want to relax and escape a little bit. And I don't need more of that in my favorite podcasts. If you want to seek it out, that's fine. But a lot of my podcasts are very political, very legal, very, politics oriented. I get that. So I know what I signed up for. And I don't blame them for doing what they do. But personally, I haven't been able to enjoy those podcasts lately because things are so difficult right now. So that's why I haven't been talking about it here. However, some of the things that are going on do affect our community directly. They affect half of you by default if you happen to be female or a woman or identified as such. I do want to talk about it. I am going to have some episodes that definitely hit on what's going on legally and with our, the world that we're in right now. I will also have a breakout podcast, probably several, that are strictly political, just me talking about politics stuff. I'm going to keep that separate from this podcast. When I make those, I will make sure you guys have the opportunity to see them if you want to see them or listen to them. But I understand if you don't, if you want to come here for escapism and to not think about the world. So yeah, that's what's going on. I do know, I do care. I'm very upset about everything, but I'm trying to keep this a safe space where you can come and relax. So that's what's going on. That's why I haven't talked about all of this. So to move on to less fraught matters, I get asked frequently, and not usually the direct question of how to start as a dom, but the question I get very frequently is along the lines of, I want my partner to be more dominant in the bedroom. How do I get them to do this? How do I help them become dominant, discover their dominant side, etc.? I get that question quite a bit. It's one of the most commonly asked questions, I have to say, now that I think about it. And it is very situationally dependent, and I do try to ask them when I get this question, well, tell me a bit about your relationship, tell me a bit about your partner, and because that is going to have a lot to do with the advice I give on how they can become more dominant. At a base level, the simple answer is to be communicative, surprisingly enough on this podcast, the 3 C's. Communicating with your partner, saying, I would like to explore this. This is something that I think is fun and exciting. Would you like to do this with me? That initial conversation can be the beginning of exploring this power exchange style relationship. Understand, and this is what I tell a lot of the people that ask me this, there are a lot of people who do not feel comfortable being dominant in that way, either in a sexual way or a play way or a bedroom way. It's just not for them. They are who they are. They're comfortable with who they are. They like who they are. And the idea of that kind of pretend, if they don't have those natural inclinations to be dominant in that way, is something that they either do not want to do, it's just not interesting to them, it doesn't sound fun to them, or it's something that they actually feel uncomfortable with. And this is something you have to take very seriously and not put pressure on or demands on, because, we always talk about consent. And it seems like kind of a strange thing to make sure that someone wants to consent to dominate you. But you absolutely have to have their consent if they are to do these things, right? In the exact same vein as you would not want to be dominated without your consent. So as I said, there are a lot of people who just do not feel comfortable that way. And it can be for a number of reasons. They've been taught their whole life that they have to be gentle and caring and loving and supportive with their partner, and the idea of using any kind of force or domination or that kind of play is really off-putting to them, and it just would not be comfortable or fun for them. That is something that can be unlearned in a safe way. If someone has those inclinations that they absolutely don't want to be aggressive or dominating in the bedroom, because of how they feel like that is a very bad thing when it's non-consensual, they can be brought along to the idea of, you're right, non-consensually, this is a terrible thing, but I want you to act this way. It would be fun for me if you acted this way. It could be fun for both of us if you acted this way. That is a good conversation to have, but do understand that some people will not want to do that. And the answer will be no, I don't want to. And at that point, you really do have to leave it alone. But let's look at a situation where you've asked them to be more dominant, that you want to play these games in the bedroom, that it would be fun for you. And they are interested. They do think that that would be fun, but they have no idea where to start. They don't know how the game works. They don't understand the rules. They don't understand what to do. You could tell them, I want you to dominate me in the bedroom. And they would say, that sounds great. What do you want me to do? Which seems topsy-turvy, right? The whole idea is that they tell you what to do. You don't tell them to tell you what to do. So that can be an initial stumbling block. That can be something that's hard for them to get over. It can be a bit intimidating to be given that power over somebody else and not really know what to do. And let's complicate that even further by there's a lot of different ways to be a dominant. There's a lot of different games you can play. There's a lot of different styles of power exchange. So, they could be at a complete loss. If this is a new world for them, if this is something they've never done before or even really considered before, how do they transition into being your dominant if you want them to be your dominant? You're going to have to help them with that if this is your request. If your desire is for them to be more dominant in this way, you're going to have to give them a roadmap as to what you're looking for. Because unlike a lot of DS relationships where you have a dom and a sub and they're trying to meet each other and see if each other has compatible DS styles, you know that you want to be dominated and you're with someone that doesn't know how to do it or that they even have that ability or that inclination in them. So you have to kind of guide them. You have to give them a roadmap of what you're looking for, the kinds of play you want to do. And I know that that seems very much like topping from the bottom, which we've talked about in a number of episodes. In this case, it's absolutely not topping from the bottom because, again, they're new to this. They haven't done this before. It isn't something that they're familiar with. So you giving them a roadmap of, okay, so the things I like it when you give me commands. I like it when you tell me to do something, and then I'll obey it. That's the kind of game I want to play. Or you can say, I want to experiment with being tied up. I want to try bondage. I want to try some sort of restraints. That seems exciting to me. I have fantasies about that. You might say, well, I have this fantasy where you chase me around the house and then you finally catch me and then we go to the bedroom, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And so since they're starting with a blank slate and they don't know what kind of dom they are yet, if they are dominant, you're going to have to help. You're going to have to give them those guidelines. And then you can say, when we play, I don't want to be in control. I don't want to tell you what to do. I want to be told what to do while we're playing. And then stick to that. Things aren't always going to go very smoothly at first. It may be a little awkward. There may be a lot of giggling from both sides, which isn't exactly what you're looking for, maybe. But again, it's asking a lot of someone that's never played these games before to just turn on a switch and know exactly what to do and exactly how to be a good dom. It takes a lot of practice, takes a lot of experience. It helps if it's something that you enjoy doing and it's something that you want to do. There are definitely people who do have a naturally dominant personality, but they've never played with that dominance in the bedroom, or they've never played with that dominance in a DS power exchange situation. For people like that, it might come a little more naturally. It might come a little more easy for them to say, oh, okay, you want me to tell you what to do. You want me to be in charge. You want to be given rules and regulations, and you want me to be controlling in this consensual way. I can do that. Let's see if it's fun. That's a fairly easy conversation to have, but I would wager that the number of people that write me and ask me, how can I get my partner to be more dominant? Their partner's probably not in that vein of dominance in their natural day-to-day life. I'm going to say that they're more towards the center of that human bell curve of they're not really dominant, they're not really submissive. They're kind of in the middle. They've never really even thought about it. So for them, again, it can be a big step to go from being, peer-to-peer, buddy-buddy, normal, vanilla relationship to being handed the reins and the crop and saying, I want you to dominate me. I think this would be a fun, sexy thing to do. So where do you begin? Well, that's exactly why I'm doing this episode. And I will probably do a number of these, kind of bringing people along on going from your very beginnings, the very first time you play, and then moving on, getting deeper into the philosophy of being a dom, into good practices of being a dom, and different ways to play those domination power exchange games. So you're brand new to this. Your partner wants you to be dominant with them. What do you do? How do you do that? How do you cross that threshold? The easiest thing you can do is start very small, start very light. We're not going to go from 0 to being chained to a wall and flogged. I don't think that's a very good first step. I think there's a lot of things that have to happen in between we've never played before and full-on impact play in restraints. That's kind of advanced level stuff. That's something that you don't want to dive into your first time because there's a lot of things you need to know and be comfortable with before you restrain somebody and start flogging them, right? That seems fairly common sense to me. So here are some good starting points. Let's start with some basic control. And these are just going to be verbal commands. You're going to set the scene. You're going to make the space look the way you want it to. And that'll be whatever is comfortable for you. If maybe the bedroom itself is something you want to keep separate, maybe keep that as a safe space, maybe keep that as an alternate place for you guys to be intimate and to have your relaxation time. You may want to choose a different room in the house. And this is something that I've seen a lot of in that we talk about kink only in the bedroom. That's more of a vague outline saying that we have a normal vanilla relationship and then we have a kinky relationship. And the kinky relationship is mainly around intimacy and sex. And in our normal lives, in our vanilla lives, we don't play those DS games. So we do say in the bedroom. It doesn't have to be in the bedroom. It can be in a different room of your house if that would be more comfortable for you. If the bedroom is comfortable, there's nothing wrong with that. I know that I have definitely done a lot of kink play everywhere from dungeon basements to anywhere you can imagine. The bathroom at a Wawa doesn't really matter. I've done it everywhere. And it doesn't matter the setting as much as the relationship between the two people. That is the key thing. So you choose your space. You set things up the way you want them to be. And then you lay some ground rules, or you negotiate those ground rules with your partner ahead of time. You say the kind of things they're into. You ask them, well, what kind of things are you thinking about? Do you want me to do impact play? Are you fantasizing about being spanked? Does being tied up appeal to you? Do you want to be blindfolded? What kind of thing are you talking about? Do you just want me to be more assertive and dominant when we're having our intimate relationships? Do you just want me to take more control? Because you have to understand that for some people, being more dominant, quote unquote, means that perhaps you initiate the intimacy and you tell them what to do and you move them around a little bit, but they're not looking to be handcuffed and flogged. That would not be what they're looking for. So when you hear dominant, when you hear, I want you to be more dominant, it's very important to find out, okay, well, what do you mean by more dominant? Do you want to be flogged, or do you want to be told what to do? Do you want both? Explain this to me a bit so I know what I'm getting into, and I don't cross over your boundaries by accident trying to do what I thought you wanted me to do, because that would be kind of disastrous, right? You were asking for your partner to be a bit more assertive in bed, and the next thing you know, you're chained to the wall and being flogged with a gag in your mouth. Maybe make sure they understand where you're at before you ask them to be dominant. But I would say, even if your partner has expressed that they really want to play rough, they want to do hair pulling, and they want to do maybe some light slapping, and they want to do really rough consensual sex, and that's what they're excited about and wanting to do, you still work up to that, right? You still start by, let's do some basic commands. I want you to kneel here in front of me. Now, you're not allowed to look up at me. I want you to keep your eyes level. No matter what happens, I want you to keep your eyes down. You're not allowed to look at me in the eye unless I tell you to. Those are the kind of very light, very easy dominance plays that you can do with someone. And you can do these with your clothes on. You can do these in a completely non-intimate way. Because what it does is it establishes a foundation for the relationship. It gives them an idea of what it's like to be dominated by you. It gives you an idea of what it's like to dominate them and their reaction. You can see right away, if you put them in this subservient position, kneeling at your feet, not looking at you in the eye, how they react to that. Does it seem like they're into it? It's kind of fun and exciting for them? Or do you see that this isn't what they wanted? This isn't what they hoped for. This is not exactly what they were going for. You have to be sensitive to that. You have to be very acute in your perception of how your commands and your actions affect the person you're playing with. That is number one. Being a good dominant, in my opinion, is being very focused on the sub. To me, it's all about the sub. Am I fulfilling the sub? Is the way that we're playing making them happy? It's not just about, I want to be dominant, I want to control people, I want to have people serve me, me. I really think that's an unhealthy style of domination. Even if you're paired with a submissive that's all they want. They want to be told what to do. They want to be degraded. They want to be made into your personal servant. That's super exciting for them. That's great. That's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that kind of subservience. I cherish that kind of subservience. However, the line between DS play, domination play, and abuse and just taking advantage of somebody, regardless of their proclivities towards submission, it can be very thin. You have to be very careful. Even in a consensual relationship, it's very easy to slip into kind of a lazy, abusive style of domination where you're receiving everything, but you're not giving anything back to your partner. And in these DS plays, where one person has a strong desire to be submissive, they still are receiving something from that submission. That is their joy. That is their passion. That is what's exciting to them. It's very fulfilling for them. But if they're not valued, if they're feeling like they're giving you their submission and you're not valuing it, and you're not appreciating it, you're just taking advantage of them, then it can very quickly become unhappy and unfun. So keep all these things in mind, balance. If you're the kind of person that the idea of being dominant to somebody is kind of off-putting, like you were raised in a way that told you don't be like that. Don't be bossy, don't be domineering, don't tell your partner what to do. That's very rude, that's very inconsiderate. And you're right. All those things are absolutely true, unless your partner consents and wants you to act that way. And you have to remember that as you're moving on in this dom journey. If you're working with someone that enjoys that style of play, you're not doing them any harm. You're not being rude. You're not being mean. You're not being a bad person by giving them the kind of play that is fun and exciting for them. Now, let's say you try it. Let's say you start those little dom games. You start with just verbal commands. You tell them to kneel. You tell them the rules. You tell them how things are going to be for the night. If you're new to this, pay very close attention to how it makes you feel. You do not have to ignore your own feelings. If playing that way is off-putting to you, it's not fun. You wanted to give it a try and you gave it a try and it just wasn't fun for you. There's nothing wrong with talking to your partner and saying, hey, look, I know you wanted to play this way and I tried it. I did my best to give it a go for you, but I really don't feel comfortable with it. Even though I know you want me to do this, it's just not who I am. I don't like it. It doesn't make me feel good. In fact, it makes me feel bad when I'm bossing you around and telling you to do stuff. Even though I can tell that you're into it, I don't like it. There's nothing wrong with having that conversation. There's nothing wrong about you if this isn't fun for you. It's just how we are. We don't get to choose whether or not we like something. That's a fundamental part of human nature. We have outside inputs and we know how they make us feel, but we cannot change how that outside input makes us feel. Some people like modern art and they think it's beautiful and thrilling and invigorating. And other people look at modern art and they think that is so ugly. Why would anybody want that? Correct? Those aren't choices we make. I don't believe that you can make that choice to appreciate something that is not attractive to you. Now, that said, sometimes education can help. I've definitely known people who did not care for classical music. They heard it, it sounded old and boring and inaccessible to them, and they just didn't enjoy it. They did not listen to it. They never would voluntarily put on a classical album and listen to it. Some of that can come down to education. You can learn to appreciate things like that. In colleges, they have classical music appreciation classes, classical art appreciation classes. That's something you can learn. And I found myself that the more I learn about something, the more interesting it can be to me. I may never cross that threshold to actually liking it, seeking it out, and enjoying it. But I have found for things that I do enjoy, the more I learn about them, the more I appreciate them. So I do like classical music, but learning more about classical music, learning the themes and the modes and the styles and the intent, learning more about the piece itself, what was the composer, what is the background of the composer, who were their influences, why did they write this piece the way they wrote it? All those things can add to my enjoyment and really make something that was background music turn into something that is very interesting and fulfilling for me. And I think there might be a correlation here with this. If this is something that doesn't interest you, if it's something that you've never really thought about, or the idea of being domineering towards somebody makes you feel bad and like you're being a bully and a bad person, learning more about the psychology behind submission and domination, learning why it is very exciting for some people, why for some people it is the most exciting thing in their lives. They've kind of dedicated their whole existence to this game we play. Learning more about human psychology and what makes your partner tick and why it makes them feel good to be submissive. All those things might help you appreciate this relationship more. And for those of you that are into DS play, domination play, even if you've been doing it your whole life, learning more about why we do this, learning more about the levers and buttons it pushes within your partner and yourself and why those are so exciting to you can deepen your appreciation of this lifestyle. As usual, I'm a very wordy person and I've already used up a half hour talking about one aspect of beginning play. So let's move on a bit from there. You've experimented with doing voice commands. You've experimented with having them kneel, giving them some basic ground rules, and doing some play like that. Maybe commanding them to do a task while you watch them and being very specific about how you want them to do that task. Again, this seems like basic DS stuff, like very first level, but it's still stuff that I do, and I've been doing this for almost 30 years. So there's an art to it. There is a very practiced nature, and there's a very fulfilling relationship that can come between two people, three people, four people, but specifically right now, two people, of them giving you complete control of them, and you exercising that control in sometimes the most mundane tasks, standing next to them and having them unload a dishwasher. But they can only do exactly what you tell them to do, and they have to do it in a certain way. Now, I want you to reach down and pick up that plate. Slowly, do it gracefully, do it in a way that is pleasing to me. Make it beautiful. Okay, now I want you to place that plate on this stack, but I don't want to hear it at all. You have to make it silent. We're talking about unloading a dishwasher. Nothing more mundane in the world, right? It can be incredibly intense and erotic and fun and exciting when it's done in a DS style of play. With those very close commands, I'm going to tell you every action I want you to do, and I don't want a single action performed outside of breathing without my say-so. And we're going to go through this whole process. Maybe it's how I'm going to get you dressed or undressed. Maybe it's how I'm going to tell you to move through the house into the bedroom and what to do once we get there. This is a game. It's a fun thing that you can do, and it's a very low stakes way of starting out in DS play. So that's something that I would advise. If you're getting into this for the first time, you don't have to jump in the deep end and wear a black leather hood and hit them with a crop. That can come later if that's something you guys want to explore. From there, from those initial sessions of doing control by voice alone, I would move into the next discussion, the next stage, which is, was that fun? Was that fulfilling to you? Did you like what we were doing? Was that exciting? Was it boring? Was it not what you were hoping for? There is definitely a misconception that being a dominant means that everything is top down. You tell, you don't ask. You command, you don't inquire. And I think that that's misleading. I think that that is a mistake to make. A lot of DS relationships will eventually end up there once the dom is very comfortable and the sub is very comfortable and there is established a relationship between the two of them where they both know what the rules are. They both know what the parameters are. At that point, the sub can let go and fall into their submission and not have to worry about telling their dom the way they like to be treated. But at the beginning, especially at the beginning of a relationship where one person's very inexperienced, or perhaps you're both very inexperienced, you got to have that communication. You've got to be able to say, did this work? Was this fun for you? Those questions do not make you any less dominant. Don't fall into that trap of thinking that you have to have all the answers, you have to be unquestioned, you have to be 100% certain all the time. Those are dominant traits. But it can become a toxic dominant trait when you are unable to accept feedback from your partner on, yes, I did like the spanking we did, and I liked it when you did me the commands, but when you were pulling my hair, I didn't like that. That is not what I thought it would be. I've always seen it and I thought it was sexy and fun, but turns out I don't actually like having my hair pulled, so let's not do the hair pulling. That's a conversation you need to have. You need to be able to have that conversation with your partner. You're establishing trust. You're establishing that they can submit to you and trust you to treat them in a way that is fun and fulfilling for them. Again, we're talking basics. We're talking fundamental dominant behavior, submissive behavior. And yes, we will talk about this for subs too. We'll talk about this from the other side of my partner wants me to be more submissive in the bedroom. How do I do that? But that's a question I've never gotten. I'm sure it exists out there, but I've never gotten that question. Doms don't write to me as much as I wish they would. This might be a if you build it, they will come scenario, because I wish I could point to some media you could watch that I trust to portray the DS lifestyle accurately. There are some decent movies. Secretary comes to mind. However, Secretary is not perfect. I would not recommend it as a starting point for DS play because of some very complicated factors. I think that it might be something I have to produce myself. I might have to produce a series of Here's how to initiate DS play with your partner videos, so we can show some different forms of DS play, some different styles of DS play, some examples of games you can play as a beginner learning how to do DS. That might be something that I look into doing. Of course, I would love to return to filming full time, but I am unable to do that right now. However, these type of videos we could definitely produce, and I'm pretty sure that Katya would enjoy that. There are a lot of games you can play when you're first starting out, before things get too heavy, too serious, too involved, and you're buying new furniture so that you can play more sexy games. With everything that you do, remember that you can always increase the intensity. But once things have gone too far, it's hard to dial it back down. So I would always recommend starting as light as possible, and then seeing how your partner reacts, and then moving it up. If you want to experiment with impact play, open hand paddling, great place to start. Nobody's going to get hurt that way. And that open hand paddling, you're going to start fairly light, and you're going to see how they react to it. You're going to see how they respond to those more gentle open hand spanks. And then slowly, carefully increase the intensity. And you'll find a place where things start to be too much. And you encourage your partner to tell you. You encourage them. You ask them, how do you feel about this? A little harder. How do you feel about this? Get their feedback. Gauge their response. And I know, again, in people's ideal fantasy, if they fantasized about being spanked or they fantasized about this kind of submission, they didn't fantasize about a whole lot of give and take dialogue most of the time. However, at the beginning, it's pretty important. Some people don't know how they're going to respond to that kind of impact play. Some people haven't been spanked in their entire lives. Others haven't been spanked since they were a child. They may fantasize about it, and it might seem erotic to them. But once they get into the moment, it may not be as fun as they thought. And the last thing we want to do as a beginning dom is push too far, to go too far, to endanger that trust that they've given to you. So we don't start with a hard hairbrush because that hurts a lot. We don't start with a belt because that can hurt a lot. And as a beginning dom, you may not understand how much force you're using in that style of impact play. So again, start light and slowly build. Watch the reaction of your partner. See if they're into it or not. You can always progress. You can always go harder. But don't start too hard and then ruin something potentially that could be fun for the both of you. Bondage, the same kind of thing. We're going to start small. Maybe use a nice soft scarf to bind the hands in front of the body, which is less threatening than having hands bound behind the body, which you'll find out. And these subtle things can make a big difference. They can make a big difference. From that, you can experiment. You can try more. You can try hands and feet. You can try hands and feet and knees and make it impossible to move, that kind of thing. But again, there's nothing wrong with starting light and then moving up. You might find that you have a passion and an interest in becoming a shibari master. Shibari is that very intricate style of Japanese or Eastern style bondage tying that is its own art form. And there are people that make beautiful works of art with shibari rope and another human being. I've seen some incredible stuff, and that might be a passion for you. You don't know unless you've experimented and tried it, educated yourself about it, found out if that's something you want to do. More importantly, find out if it's something your partner is interested in and they want to do as well. And again, you go from a silk scarf tied in front of the body to elaborate suspension bondage. There's a whole spectrum there, but you always want to start small. Start easy, start with the light stuff. Be inventive, have fun with it. Make sure your partner's having fun with it. Check in with them frequently if this is what they were hoping for, if this is what they wanted. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about in this very first episode of How to Be a Dominant, be aware of how your emotional response, how your actions can influence the scene. This is not a place where you want to lose control, where you don't want to be very careful about your level of enthusiasm. Let's put it that way. I have definitely had people reach out to me that have said, I was experimenting, doing DS with my partner, and all of a sudden things went way too far and they were way rougher with me than I had expected and that I liked. And they told me it's because they lost control. They got too excited in the moment and they, whatever. I do hear that, unfortunately, too often. So again, especially at the beginning, when you're learning how this works, you've got to be very much in control of yourself. You have to be very careful not to push things too far. So be aware of your emotional state. Be aware of how you're feeling. Be aware of what's going on in this new scene for you to make sure that you're not getting out of control. That's something that's very important, especially at the beginning. Always in a DS relationship, but at the beginning when it's new for both of you and you're doing this experimentation, go easy, go soft, make it light, make it fun, make it exciting. But don't feel like your partner has asked you to be dominant, so you come in like a wrecking ball and start throwing them around. That is not beginning play. That's more advanced play by far. Specifically learning how to be rough with somebody that way and not hurt them takes practice. You can be very rough in an intimate setting or outside intimacy. You can be very aggressive with somebody and not hurt them. You're kind of protecting them from themselves in some ways. But that's something that you practice and you become better at and you learn how to do. You don't want to start off being too rough with your partner. Okay, folks. This ended up being a bit more in depth of a subject than I had originally thought it was going to be. I was going to give some light tips on how to start domination. But as I thought about it and got into it, I thought, yeah, there's a lot of depth here, even at the first levels of domination, even at the very beginning when you're just learning how it works. This will be part of an ongoing series. I want to talk more about this, as well as integrate it into the other series that I have going. For example, that further discussion on polyamory and being a new partner, more discussions on the truth, and other things as well. I've got plenty of things to talk about, and I do enjoy my time with you. I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you would like to become a Patreon sponsor of the show and help keep all this running, go over to wickedfellow.com. The website is there, the Patreon is there, the YouTube is hosted there. The podcast itself is posted to that site. So if you don't want to get your podcast through Apple or Audible or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast, you can always download it directly from the site or listen to it from the site there. If you do decide to become a Patreon subscriber, one of the benefits there is I release a weekly update as often as I can. I've been pretty good lately. And in that update, I talk about studio news, what's on my mind, and in that update, I give studio news, things that are on my mind, suggestions for entertainment, stories about my life, that kind of thing. If you're interested, it is available for as little as $1 a month. And there are other tiers that have other benefits. For example, if you want to have a phone call with me, there is a tier for that. You can have a call. We can talk one-on-one about anything you want to talk about. Remember that is something that you don't have to do forever. If you just want one call, sign up for 1 month of that. In addition to that and some other Patreon-only perks, I do want to add some more perks to the website in general, things that are for patrons only. But remember, I will always keep this podcast absolutely free. For all of you that listen and can't contribute, do not worry about it. I put the podcast out for free because I want to give back to this community. And I hope that I have some good wisdom and some advice for you that are into the kink and poly lifestyle. That is something that I'm absolutely happy to do. I appreciate very much those of you that can support. But for those of you that don't, do not worry about it. You guys are just as welcome here. All right, folks, that wraps it up for this week. As always, consent is king. Take very good care of each other. And I'll see you next week.